Howdy folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and today is Saturday, May the 12th, 2018. And I have the very distinct honor and great pleasure of welcoming to the show for the first time a gentleman who has been in the mining and finance sectors for well over 20 years. He has international business experience. He's worked with a multitude of mining and banking companies around the world. And he is currently the president of Wealth Minerals. And I'm speaking, of course, of Tim McCutcheon. Tim, welcome to the Daily Coin.
Thank you for having me, Rory.
Well, I'm glad that you're here. And we were talking just before we started the show. And that's where I kind of want to start there. And one of the things that I found in my research that I was doing was in China, that China has actually built a cargo ship that is completely fueled by ion batteries. Now, my guess is that requires, I think that the article was saying that the ship generates like 2.5 megawatts of power, which sounds like a lot. I'm not going to say that I know what that means, but it sounds like a lot. Can you speak to that as far as what's happening with that sector? Because if we've got cargo ships that are being run by lithium ion batteries, that's going from, what we see out on the street, like the Nissan Leaf or the Tesla or one of these vehicles, to something that is the size of 3 football fields. I mean,
I'll tell you what,
what's going on with that?
Yeah. Well, it's going to go to airplanes too, trains. Wow. I mean, let's remember what lithium ion batteries are. I mean, it's simply it's a means of storing energy so that you can use it when you need it. It provides a lot more flexibility in how you use and consume energy, and that's really the paradigm shift that's unfolding before our eyes. Lithium ion batteries don't create energy, but they allow an unprecedented new level of flexibility that more or less completely changes the whole thing, the energy markets. And that's really the key point here. So, it's the simple thing where think of a solar panel, right? In the sun, in daytime, you charge up the solar panel because the sun's out, but you want the lights on at night because that's when there's no light. So that, bridging that gap between generating energy and using energy has always been sort of the Achilles heel of the energy market, because a lot of times you're overproducing energy when you don't really need it. And so being able to park it away on the side by storing it in a lithium ion battery is a total game changer. So yeah, it's going to be cars, it's going to be boats, it's going to be airplanes, trains, subways, because fundamentally it's just basically taking energy and making it more convenient. I mean, it would be absurd to think that your cell phone had a little gasoline powered motor next to it, right?
Yes.
That'd be nuts. But it's just that concept just scaled out, right? I mean, the current situation with cars is crazy to think about. Each one has their own personal little power generator. Obviously, it makes more sense to have power generation in a centralized place where there's a lot of economies of scale. But then how do you distribute out that power in a way where it can be used when it's needed? And the answer in the past has been, well, we just have to use fossil fuels and, have little engines on everything that we need, your lawnmower or anything else. Now, with this battery technology, we can go to the original idea, which is, economies of scale, big power generation plants that are very efficient, and then distribute out that energy when and as it's needed with the use of lithium-ion batteries.
Gotcha. Okay, and that now I can wrap my head around that whole idea of economy of scale and moving to, cargo ships and planes and homes or whatever, that makes perfect sense, because you have a centralized power source that distributes the power similar to what we have now, but instead of there being a generator at the end, you've got just something that's capturing the power and holding it, and that's all that it's doing.
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
It's you would think
it's a
that
whole new world, huh?
What's that?
It's a whole new world.
It's a whole new world, and it's an idea that, like I said, now I can wrap my head around it. And I mean, if we're talking about cargo ships and planes, and not to mention cars. I mean, is there enough lithium to do all this? I mean, because we know that oil, some would argue that we reached peak oil back in the 50s, some say in the 70s, some say we haven't reached peak oil, some say there's no such thing. I mean, what about lithium? I mean, how are we going? Is there enough lithium to meet all of this demand?
Yeah, Mother Nature gave us lots of lithium. So there's, from all analysis that I've seen, there's certainly not an issue in terms of there being enough lithium to satisfy everyone's needs, far, far into the future. That's not the issue. The issue is, in the short to medium term, the plans that are on the drawing boards and have been announced, and in some cases already funded, to consume lithium. And the most obvious example of this, of course, are the auto manufacturers. It's not at all clear how they're going to be supplied with lithium. And so, 10 years out, you don't really see any issue in terms of there being enough lithium to fuel demand. But 5 years out, you see a whole bunch of issues, and that's what's exciting for the company that I work for, Wealth Minerals, which is that we can bridge that gap. And if you're a big auto manufacturer and you're going to spend $5 billion on building a factory to make lithium-ion batteries, you better think long and hard about where you actually got to get your raw materials, because you don't want your $5 billion factory standing idle because you didn't spend a couple $100 million on the source of lithium.
Right.
And that's kind of what we're looking at right now. We got a lot, we got a very narrow pipe, and a whole lot of people want to squeeze through it. And we were discussing this, right before we started the show. Is that the people, the engineers and all the economists and the scientists that work at these big corporations, lithium is a small little cost item in their spreadsheet, right? I mean, they put together their little financial models and everything, and we buy so many tons of this and so many ounces of that, and blah 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 blah. And there's a little line item in there, lithium, and the number's not very big, but without it, you can't have a lithium-ion battery without lithium. I mean, it's that simple. And so, it's a little tiny number. I'm sure it doesn't get the attention it should get, because the reality is that in the long term, plenty of lithium. In the short to medium term, these guys are going to have serious issues in finding lithium to supply their demand needs.
And along those lines, I mean, could you explain what countries dominate the global lithium market? I mean, is there countries that are better than others, and how does this narrow pipe, how is it going to expand?
How does it all play out? Yeah. Well, it's an interesting situation, because the lithium, you can pretty much, the largest asset in the world produces 40% of the world's lithium. Right, one asset. It's a mine in Australia. Okay. And the next largest supplier of lithium is the Atacama Salar in Chile, and that's about a third of global supply. It's two operations, but it's really the same asset. It's just sort of, they've divided up between two companies, but it's really the same thing. So that's 30%, right? And then you have a few other suppliers in there. So basically, on one hand, you can pretty much account for about 95% of global lithium supply.
Nice.
So it's a very small space. And so, the excitement in the industry is, let's see how we can open this up. Now, in terms of, again, Mother Nature and everything, Mother Nature's put a whole lot of lithium into Australia, right? And so they mine that from hard rock mines. So they're digging up rock. Mother Nature put a whole lot of lithium in Quebec. And so there's some mines opening up there in Quebec to mine lithium. But the cheapest and most abundant source of lithium in the world by far is in salt lakes called salars in South America. So in Chile, Argentina. Chile right now, accounts for a third of global production. Argentina accounts for about 10% or so, and Australia is 40%. Yeah.
Okay.
So those are the jurisdictions right now that dominate, and that's really not going to go away. Right? Because, you have to dig raw materials where Mother Nature put them. You can't choose what country you go to. You got to go to the country that has it. And so those are pretty much the key players. Canada will be coming in, but that's it for the future. And, Australia is obviously a stable jurisdiction and everything else. But the problem with Australia is all of the lithium there is hard rock lithium, which is traditionally more expensive to extract than lithium from these salt beds. Chile's got tons of lithium in it, but it all comes from these salt beds, and it's the lowest cost supplier, and it supplies a third of global supply, right? So it's a huge player. And then Argentina is kind of, getting its feet in and coming online, and they're going to be ramping up production there. Problem with Argentina is, it's a great country, but from a macro point of view, they tend to have at fairly regular intervals sort of, stability issues, right?
Yes, which they're experiencing currently.
Exactly. So, the whole point is like, the thing that all of these, car makers will tell you, 9 ways to Sunday. They're going to say, look, the most important thing for us is stability of supply. You probably read recently the Ford F-150 truck. They had to stop down production of the truck because one supplier couldn't produce parts for it. It's the same thing with all of these huge billion-dollar factories. They want to make sure that, come hell or high water, they get the supply they need when they need it all the time.
Right.
Yeah? That's total priority. And so as soon as you have a jurisdiction that has a little bit of a spotty record, then you start saying to yourself, well, can I really depend on this jurisdiction to feed lithium when I need it over the long haul? And so that's where, you look at Australia, you look at Chile, you look at Canada as being, the places that you really want to focus on in the lithium space.
Now, as far you mentioned the cost differential, which I was going to ask you in regards to Australia with the hard rock lithium, and then you have the brine-based lithium.
That's right, the Salt Lake. Yeah, that's right.
Salt Lake in Chile. And I know that China is bringing several gigafactories online. They have massive plans to begin pumping out nothing but lithium-ion vehicles. And
that's right.
How? Right. And I know that China has a great relationship with Australia, with their mining sector overall, with their gold, their silver, the other various metals, and I presume the same thing holds true with lithium. Now, are they going to shift, or is China in? Are they looking at what you guys are doing?
Oh yeah, look, Chile? China. They're I hate to say it, but the U.S. and the Western sort of world in general is really behind the ball on this one. Chinese figured out very early on, just because, look, everyone's heard about smog in Chinese cities, right? Yes. And so, their key thing is how do we get all of these little tiny, we were talking about earlier, right? Everyone individual power plant. How do we get rid of that? Because it's causing an awful lot of pollution. And the obvious answer was battery technology. So they very early on went all in on this, and they pretty much locked down, more or less all of the supply coming out of Australia. They've been very aggressive in South America, locking down supply in Argentina and Chile. And of course, they're looking at us and everyone else in this space. So, they get it from the point of view of if you control the supply of the raw material, you control the end product, because there is no end product without the supply of raw material.
Exactly.
What we just discussed, right? Mother Nature didn't put lithium in Manhattan. Because if it did, it'd be great to have a mine there, right? But she didn't put it there, so you got to mine it where it is, not where you want it to be. And they're way ahead of the curve on us. And so they're locking down supply. They're buying up projects because they realize that if you control this space, you might not control the production of energy, but you certainly control how it's used, and that's going to be the main shift going forward. That's frankly going to dominate the market.
Exactly. And I want to kind of look at Wealth Minerals, and you are the president of Wealth Minerals Limited, and it's a mining company, and you guys are operating down in Chile, and your stock is available on the Toronto Ventures Exchange under the symbol WML, and you're on the over-the-counter market under the symbol WMLLF. And Tim, if you would, just kind of give us the nuts and bolts of what Wealth Minerals Corporation, what you guys are all about and what you're doing. I know we've been kind of going over that, but I know you've got some big projects that are coming to fruition right now.
That's right. Look, so just, in a nutshell, Mother Nature's put a lot of lithium in Chile. And the biggest source of lithium is this salt bled or salar that we talked about called the Atacama. And if you remember, there's a James Bond movie where it takes place in the Atacama. It's the driest place on the planet. But underneath that dry sort of surface is a whole lot of lithium salts that are essentially impregnated with water coming up from below the surface and some snow melt off from on top. So you have all this lithium sort of sloshing around in this salt bed under surface. And, the current place, the Atacama Salar, is a third of global output. And all of that's coming from one part of this salar, this big salt lake bed. We have a part of that as well. We have a very large land position just to the north of the current operations that supply a third of global lithium. So what we're doing right now is doing all of the operational work, basically, to study the resource, understand what it is, put some numbers on the board, and then start extracting it. So that process is all going on. We're working with the Chilean state mining company. We brought them into a joint venture on this asset because we want, everyone's got to be happy, right? And no matter where you work, you want to make sure that everyone's happy, because that way you avoid having problems. And so we brought in the Chilean state to be our partner, and they're happy to be there. And so we're working together basically to develop this asset. And given, the characteristics of what's being produced in the south, it's the lowest cost source of lithium in the world by far. I mean, give you an idea, they're producing lithium at just over $2,000 a ton of LCE, it's lithium carbonate. It's a chemical that has the lithium in it. They're producing it at just over $2,000 a ton in the south. The next closest competitor in terms of producing lithium is about $5,000 a ton, and that's the mine in Australia. Yeah, it's a big, big difference. So it's huge, right? And so we're right north of that. But all of the geophysical work that we've done and basically suggests that what they're extracting in the south, I'm pretty confident that's going to be where we are in the north. It'd be hard to see how that wouldn't be the case. And so we're doing that, and we have a few other projects in Chile that we're working on as well that are very prospective in terms of the lithium content and the size of those assets. But the point about Wealth Minerals is that the medium term gap between expected demand and expected supply, there's going to be a real wake up call, and there aren't a lot of companies that have assets like we do to fill that gap. And that's how we're positioning the company, to really just get the maximum punch out of that sort of crisis, if you will, in the lithium sector in the short to medium term.
Well, it sounds like you guys are well on your way, and I was looking over the Trinity project that you guys have down there. And if you would, Tim, walk us through this, because this looks really cool. But before you do, I've got a quick question regarding, because, with more traditional mining, like with what I'm familiar with as far as gold and silver and the base metals, there's a 43101, and that's the document that you really want that says we've got X number of ounces
or
in the
tons
ground,
or whatever.
Tons,
yeah,
exactly. Now, is there the equivalent, or is there a 43101 that's for lithium in the same way? I mean, is that?
Well, technically, yes, there is, okay. And we're certainly working on that. The reality, though, is that the lithium sector is very young, right? And so there aren't a lot of people who are qualified to write that kind of report. And so, one of the challenges we have is basically physically getting people all prepped up to write those reports, because there just aren't a lot of them, because there aren't a lot of lithium operations in the world.
Right.
So we're putting all of that together. And that will be a major catalyst for the company, in the next, call it 6 months or so, is putting out NI 43-101 reports on our assets. So that's definitely on the horizon. It's a lot of work in the field. It's also a lot of desktop work, doing modeling and just doing research, and talking with engineers and geologists, and then writing all that up in a report. So that's all happening on all of the assets, frankly, but it's going to be, there are different stages of development. The third asset we have, Laguna Verde, is the closest to coming out with a technical report that would have, some concrete numbers on it, and we hope to have that out soon. Atacama has a 43101 report out, but it doesn't have a resource in it. So it has a full description, that basically meets all of the requirements of the Toronto Stock Exchange, but it doesn't have a number to it. And Trinity we're going towards that as well. But you mentioned Trinity, and this recent press release we came out on that.
Right.
And the long and the short of it is that this basin up there, it's about 100 kilometers to the east of Atacama. So it's still like literally the driest place on the planet. It's a little smaller than the Atacama, but it's dry. And all of the previous work that was done there, suggests that this is going to be a major lithium project, very comparable to some of the projects in Argentina, except that they're in Chile. The Trinity project's in Chile, so it's a better jurisdiction from our point of view.
Much better.
And it's drier. And again, the key, just so your audience sort of can picture this is a pretty low-tech industry. You're pumping up salt water from a dried-out salt lake bed, and then you're dumping that salt water into gigantic ponds, and you dry it under the sun.
Yeah, and now there's
weird,
an image
right?
Well, you've got an image on your website, over at wealthminerals.com, and and it's right there on the screen, and it's these piles. It looks like piles of salt, and I presume that that's what you're talking about.
That's right. So you're dumping salty water into a pond, and then you're letting the sun dry it out, and then you got to basically take those salts that are left over, and you kind of smush them together, and then you let that dry out again, and off you go. So the Andes Mountains is sort of like a curtain of between dry and wet, and it's anything on the Andes Mountains to the west where Chile is, it's just dry as a bone. And that's great, because if your whole business model is basically waiting for the sun to dry out water, then the drier it is, the faster you get that product to market.
Yep.
And so Trinity up there, we're going to be drilling on some of the previous work that we did. So here's a neat thing. So basically, salt water conducts electricity. You remember your little kid, you're swimming in the ocean. They say if there's a thunderstorm, get out of the ocean because you'll get electrocuted or whatever.
Right.
So salt water conducts electricity. So what we did is we went up there, and the salt water that we have underground in these projects, if it's salty, it probably has lithium salts, right? And so you kind of know where that goes. So if you can find a salty water area under one of these lake beds, it's a pretty high chance that it's going to have lithium in it, because the salt is lithium salt. So we went up there, and basically what you do is you take these gigantic lines of electricity and you zap them into the ground, and then you can basically measure the ricochet time of that coming back up to the surface. The faster it goes, it means that there's less resistance to the electricity, which means you got salt water, and you can measure that. And so what we have in the Trinity project, there's whole areas of that where, basically you got huge pools of, it's pretty clear it's going to be lithium-bearing saltwater or brines right below the surface there. So what's exciting about this, we're going to go up there with some drill rigs, put some holes into this, take out those samples. But given the historical work that was done and the fact that there's lithium at the surface, it's pretty low risk sort of a venture we're doing. It's just that at the end of the day, you still have to put the numbers on the board, right?
Right. All the news that's coming out, you had another release where you guys had brokered a deal, or it's a private placement of $5 million. And how will that assist with the stock? I know that the stock is down a little bit, but you guys have a target of Canadian $2.50 a share. How do you see will that $5 million help to get you guys back to that, or what's going on with that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the we're all part of the stock market, right? And so think of it as being a soldier in a war. You're dealing with your daily battles, but at the end of the day, it's the generals and the politicians that determine, which way the army goes. And so, we do what we can do, right? We were at, I think, $1.40 over the summer. We've come off along with every other peer group company, right? So all of the other guys doing similar things with lithium assets, they're all down about the same as we are. In fact, we're actually outperforming our peer group. So, look, everyone likes the stock price going up. I mean, believe me, the management in particular does. We're motivated by the stock price going up, but you got to deal with sort of things that are beyond your control, right? And the market, the Dow Jones peaked in December, and now it's off a little bit. So yeah, we've come off. We're doing this financing. We have to put money in the bank, and the money in the bank is going to pay for this work that we're talking about.
Okay.
We've always been successful at raising money. We have some money in the bank now from the last raise we did in December, but we need more to go out and get those drill rigs out there, churning away. It is what it is. We of course would like to get a strategic investor involved so that we don't have to issue shares all the time to raise money for operations. Get a strategic investor in with a big investment, and that big investment then will pay for things for quite a long time. Call it 18 to 24 months. But for the time being, we're working with strategics to get them comfortable with the story and get them in. But until that day happens, we're working with high net worth individuals, the retail market, and we suffer from the whims of the market, and we benefit from the whims of the market. It's just the nature of being a public company. But the target prices that are out there, are very exciting for us because it indicates that we get everything lined up and people start understanding the story. We're off to the races.
I think that you're probably well on your way and just don't realize it.
That's right.
With everything that you guys have going on, and with what's happening with the overall market, like you stated at the very beginning, there's in the long term, everything's going to work out fine. But here in the short and medium term, everything is getting choked because there's just not enough people that are producing. There's not enough of you out there, which is
That's
good
right.
for you. So I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I'm not so ignorant that I can't see that. I can't see that that's not a benefit,
Well, that's right. That's
two
right.
Two and still equals 4.
Well, that's right. And the thing about, just another thing for your audience to kind of think about is, you can go to Google Maps, right? You can plug in Chile and Argentina and everything else, and you can actually see all of these salt lake beds, right?
Yep.
So everyone knows where they are. So it's not, and Mother Nature's not going to make a new one. Certainly not in our lifetime, right? Because it takes millions of years to create.
Right.
So there aren't enough people out there who are doing this, and there need to be, because all these assets, everyone knows where they are. So it's really, we've got our hands on the best ones in the best jurisdiction, and we're driving forward. And when all of these guys come in and they're going to say, hey, we need lithium for more batteries for our cars and our boats and our airplanes and our trains, and someone's going to say, well, gee, we got to start producing it. And then they're going to look to us.
Exactly. Because by that time, you guys will be the absolute experts in every aspect of it. Not taking anything away from your knowledge base at this point, but 5 years, 7 years from now, 8 years, whatever. That's, you guys are going to gain a lot more knowledge, and you're going to know a lot more about what's going on. Whereas all these guys that are going to be flooding in over the course of that time, they're not going to know anything.
Well, think about, the guys who staked oil claims in the 1920s in Texas.
Exactly.
Right? That's what this is.
And there you go. Is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with, Tim?
Look, I just want to encourage them to look at the website. If you have any questions, please call us up. We don't live in an ivory tower. We're more than willing to have a chat with people to get them to understand the story. So I would just encourage people to take a look at the www.wealthminerals.com. And feel free to give a call or drop a note, and hopefully I can answer some questions.
Yeah, and the guys over at Wealth Research Group, they've put together a great report covering all of this, and you can find that at wealthresearchgroup.com/Chile. And if you're interested in their stock, you can find them on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol WML. You can find them on the over-the-counter market under the symbol WMLLF. Tim, thank you so much for all your time this afternoon.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.